race, I feel, was just a word created to distract people from the simple fact that we are humans, you know? It don't matter what color you are, it don't matter where you from. At the end of the day, we all humans. We all have the same bodily organs. We all move the same. We all have the same type of brains. And I feel like if people actually accepted that concept, it'd be a topic that wouldn't even have to be addressed, you know? Race wouldn't even be such a heavy subject where, you know, everyone starts cringing or feeling uncomfortable because it wouldn't be present if we just all looked at each other as humans.
I think that race is such a sensitive topic and a polarized topic in our day and age because there is a lot of hurt and there's a lot of things that come into that, just several aspects. But specifically, as I've been thinking about this, I think that race is so sensitive because we've come to a place in our society where we're not necessarily being considerate of other people's opinions. We're not thinking about how other people might be affected, but we're just thinking about what we are feeling and what we think. And so we just come with this idea of I'm right and you're wrong, and it doesn't really matter what you say or what you do. So I think it's really just an idea of often we are not willing to empathize with people. We're not willing to come at people with understanding and being willing to step into their shoes for a second and think about what they might be feeling, what they've experienced. Because just because something isn't a reality for me doesn't mean that it's not a reality for someone else.
I think the topic of race is such a sensitive and polarized subject right now because I don't feel like the United States has come to terms with what happened. Like, being an African American is difficult from the youngest to the oldest, no matter what day and age it is. We haven't come to terms with accepting what happened. We haven't come to terms with accepting that white people came to this country, and not only just for African Americans, but for our indigenous brothers and sisters, they came and took from them and took what wasn't theirs and use it against them. I think as soon as we come to terms about what has happened and truly accept that racism and slavery was a thing that happened in our country, it's part of our history. And slavery isn't really taught in history as much. You know, we have one chapter maybe about slavery, and it's just a brief little summary about what happened, but people don't really know what our ancestors endured and what they went through, and how that mindset completely changed African American people or indigenous people as a whole.
The topic of race, it's a funny topic. You know, it's logic based on how you were raised, how you were brought up, who you were brought up with. You know, it has a lot to do with, you know, not just that, but, you know, who you want to be as a person in general. You know, race-wise, you know, a lot of people just see me and think, oh, yeah, he's black, and that's it, face value. That's kind of what all race is, and that's why it's a sensitive topic. You know, nobody wants to get in-depth and deeper, because if you got to know me, you'd realize, oh, snap, he's not just black. And that's when the kicker comes in, you know. It's always funny when you get to talking about race with certain people because it's a little iffy topic at times. You know, some people have no problem talking about it. Some people it's a major issue.
This issue of race being sensitive and polarized, especially in this day and age, I really believe that this image that we've had forever of the melting pot, that's been pulled away. That we realized that there wasn't so much of a melting pot. There was some melting, but people have carried on animosities, belief systems, prejudice, ignorances, and that it's become such a heavy issue because both sides, it becomes just such a sensitive thing to talk about race because of those carrying ons of those former beliefs. And now all of a sudden, with this stopping of being politically correct, it's apparently okay to attack people for speaking Spanish because this is America, or to yell at a Native American because you perceive him to be Hispanic and tell him to go back where he came from.
Or yell at a black man because he shouldn't be in that apartment complex because black people can't afford this house, this housing area.
So I think that my upbringing has shaped the way that I perceive race in several ways. My upbringing is has many angles to it when you think about race, and I'll explain that a little bit. I am half Caucasian, a blend of Caucasian things. When I asked my mom, or when I asked my grandma for it was an ancestry project. I said, "Grandma, where are we from?" And she said, "Texas." And I said, "No, Grandma, I mean, like, where are we from?" And she said, "Well, Texas." And I said, "No, Grandma, like a long time ago." And she said, "Well, my mama's from Alabama." And so I said, "No, Grandma, I mean a long time ago. Where are we from?" And she said, "Well, I guess England." So half of me is very American and Caucasian. And although you can't see it by appearance, the other half of me is Hispanic. My father was very Mexican and a dark color. So I have this blended reality in my life.
You know, my upbringing is kind of like everybody else's that you can say is quote unquote black and being a male. I grew up in a single household with just my mother. Um, it was cool though. I liked it because it wasn't just my mother who raised me. I had my mother, had my brother, had all my aunts, my uncles, my grandma. You know, I had more family involved in my life than I thought one person could have. And my relationships with that, you know, helped build me as far as how cultural and ethical I was. And that's what helped me really build as far as race, you know, because I got a lot of sides from that. I got my mom's side raising me, and I kind of got, you know, the black culture, you know, the fried chicken, the rice and beans and stuff like that. But then I also got the Dominican side, my dad's side, which is kind of a side I don't really like to talk about. But you know, I got plantanos from that. I got certain types of candy. You know, I got certain types of music from that. And it was kind of dope.
My upbringing was, I think, kind of unique. Um, Elementary school, I was pretty much the only black girl in my entire class, all the way up to maybe like sixth grade. And then there was maybe another black girl, but she was in the class across the hall from me. And so I think that definitely has shaped the way I view race. For the longest time, I could never understand why mom and dad would always make a big situation of me being the only black girl. I didn't get it until about middle school. And then I was just like, I understand now. There's no one who looks like me. There's no one who understands what we experience at our house, with our family, with our friends. Um, so I feel like being at a predominantly white elementary school definitely made me more of the cookie cutter type of girl compared to my cousins who went to schools in like mainly urban areas, who were around their peers who looked like them and acted like them and sounded like them, and so they sounded like people who looked like them and sound like them. I, on the other hand, sounded more proper, you know, didn't really use a whole bunch of slang words until I got older and came around more people who looked like me and more people who acted like me and came from.
I think my upbringing had everything to do with how I turned out as an adult. Um, Genetics and parental interference or guidance. I'm not sure which, maybe some of both, but I did not grow up having an understanding or a comprehension of race, of different races. I didn't think I was white and you're black and you're brown and you're red and you're yellow. We grew up living partly in Rhode Island, but the rest of my growing up time was done in military installations. And I grew up during the Vietnam War conflict, depending on which version of history you choose. But we were held together not by skin color. We were held together by the fact that we didn't know whether our fathers were going to come back. You know, for us, it wasn't that there's this little group of white children playing with that group of brown children, playing with that group of black children, or red or yellow or what have you. We were all on a base waiting to find out if our dads would come home.
So the way my upbringing was, you know, I lived in a really minority filled neighborhood. I'm from Mount Bello, Denver, but I'm half Mexican. My father's from Jalisco, and my mother's actually from Chicago, Illinois. So the way I perceived races growing up, I was always open-minded and always was accepting to all types of people just because of the fact that who I was as a person, you know. Half of my family's Mexican and the other half is black. So the way that shaped me, it just gave me a broader understanding that we are the same, you know. We all human. We just, you know, different shades and whatnot, different from different places, but at the end of the day, we all the same. And that really just gave me a sense of identity. A lot of times, you know, someone may think or assume that someone that's mixed with two races might be confused or whatnot, but really that wasn't the case. It just really, it exemplifies me as unity, period. It doesn't matter where you're from, that you could come together. And with that being said, it just always broadened my view of the world. It always made me look at people as equal, never look down on somebody because who they was or where they was from, but just to appreciate everybody.
I have one particular image in my mind of watching an old couple come into town in an old buckboard wagon, and they were dressed in what was traditional wear for the Navajo folks at the time. And growing up around the military, as Patty said, you know, we didn't really delineate by race or religion. We were kind of in it together, as Patty said. For us, in my family, it wasn't as dire because my father wasn't in Vietnam. He was, found out later, he was down in Managua, Nicaragua, getting rid of the evidence of the Bay of Pigs, munitions that were used. And we spent time up in Washington State, so it was a real lovely time in the summer, and we got to see my mom's relatives. But anyway, just being around kids of different races, of different ethnicities and religions, that was normal.
As far as unity goes, you know, you see spurts of it here and there. You don't see the whole thing. Now, as far as division, that's the part that you kind of see the most. As far as the broader aspect of media goes, as far as what you see on day-to-day things. Like, I'm not to be funny, within the past 24 hours, all I've seen is, you know, the bombing of the places in Sri Lanka, and it kind of hurt me a lot. And I was just kind of sitting there like, okay, cool. Well, then you got to see in everybody's comments right under it, and it was just a negative sight. You know, there are people who sitting there giving their prayers and their condolences to the families and the people who live there, and not just to the people who live there, but to the country itself for the giant loss. And then you saw people who were negatively bashing and just negatively verbalizing their hatred towards these people in their country and saying that it was a good thing and that it really doesn't matter. So when you see it from that point of view, you kind of get to realizing that media is kind of just a thing. You know, it's not saying right or wrong. It's just a place where people come with different aspects and different views and kind of put them out there, no matter whether they be right or wrong, you know.
I'm going to pick on media, and I'm going to do it lightly. Native Americans, one of the constant concerns lately that you read in the Native newspapers, see on the TV, the Native television stations, is that Native Americans are invisible. There's very little representation of contemporary or actually accurate representation of traditional natives. There's very little representation in Congress. We just had two come from, at least one from our state, two Native Americans go into the House of Representatives, Native American women. But when you look at media, when you look at TV shows, when you look at movies, they're way underrepresented.
And a lot of times, you know, the media, I feel, is the biggest enemy to the people sometimes. You know, they give out, you know, everyone knows that the media is a gatekeeper. They show and they project what they want to. It's like in Chicago, all you hear about is the crazy killings and all the crime going in the city, but really, that's only little sections of the city, you know, that's going through that type of turmoil. Really, it's a good city, but you won't never hear that or you won't never understand and know that if you never been there and you just watching CNN and seeing all the murders. Really, that's just, you know, it's not something little. Of course, anyone getting killed is a bad thing, but that's not even what the city's made of. It's a great city. Same with other areas, you know, they, you know, portray images to people that gives people a false sense, which detours people's thinking of when they see a race. It's like they place the world on their shoulder. Like when they see, let's say, a lot of people see somebody and they assume that that person's like everybody else they seen that the news projected.
I hear people a lot say it's the media's fault that there is division, and I don't think that's true at all. I think the media media outlets hold the mirror up to society, and we see reflected back what's going on in front of us. I think there is plenty of blame in politics, in religion, in groups, in fringe groups in society, in mainstream society, for the unrest that I think we're facing now. It's funny, growing up, I thought that living through the late 60s and 70s, that would be the period of unrest and that things would be better. And I don't know that I believe that anymore.
This is a really tricky question because I feel like media doesn't really want to talk about religion, doesn't really want to talk about race, and so I feel like it's divided from people who are open to talking about it to people who rather just overlook it. Being a person who is very religious, my religion goes everywhere I go, so I definitely am more sensitive to people who aren't religious. I feel like, and I feel like now it's almost, you kind of look down upon if you have a strong religion.
I think that media affects the unity and division within race, religion, and nationality. I think it can be a powerful tool on both sides. It can be something that is used for good and something that is used for negativity. So I think with that, I think that if media is being used as the way it should be used to represent reality and represent what's really going on in the world. But I know that that doesn't always happen.
A 100% yes. I feel uncomfortable when I'm the only person of my race in the midst of a group of people. I used to not. And it used to not bother me because, like I said earlier, I'm used to being the only one of my race. But I didn't realize it bothered me until I worked in an office where I was the only, not only just African American, but the only African American woman. And they would start asking me questions that I really just, not that I don't mind answering, but I just get asked all the time, like about my hair, about my music, about my church, about things like that. And it's just be like, man, how come you just don't get it?
So when it comes to, you know, being singled out, and when I say singled out, just when it becomes to being like the only person that looks like you in the environment, it could be uncomfortable to a lot of people. But, you know, through my life, like I said, I was a migrant baby. I traveled everywhere living with different family members and whatnot, so it taught me to be comfortable in any environment. It taught me to adapt. And like I said, I'm a person who came from an area where college wasn't even in the picture or in the goals of anybody. So when I actually got the opportunity to come to college, you know, of course, to play sports and get an education, it really clicked at first that there ain't gonna be a lot of people that's gonna look like me. It really didn't click until I got here and I seen like, wow, I'm the only black person in my class, you know. I wonder why it's like this, you know. But it never made me feel uncomfortable or feel out of place. It just really opened up enlightenment in me, really. It just made me want to understand, okay, why is it like that here?
I often don't feel uncomfortable when I'm the only one of my race in the midst of people. And I know that there are probably some times, some unique times that I do, but often my go-to is to not feel uncomfortable because I was brought up in a home that was surrounded by other cultures. And in my schooling, in elementary school, I went to a school that was mostly Hispanics, with maybe I was one of 5 lighter colored students. And so it was mostly Hispanics. And that's the culture that I kind of grew up in away from home also was a lot of Hispanics.
I have a small story. My dad's younger sister, Aunt Vera Mae Hamilton, and I were traveling through Alabama to Montgomery, Alabama, and we stopped near Selma, Alabama, and we were stopped at a mom and pop store, kind of an Allsup's, and everybody there but us was African American. And my aunt said, "Wayne, should we stop here? Should we go on?" And I said, "We're in America. We're fine." So we got out of the car. I gassed up the truck. We got out. We went in the store. And I'm standing around and obviously not part of the store or the community. And all of a sudden, I can't find my aunt. So I turned to a young man and I said, "Do you know where my aunt went?" He said, "Yes, sir. She went to the restroom. And that's around the corner outside here." "Thank you, sir." I went, met my aunt. We went, bought our purchases, and we left.
I used to. I really did. I used to feel really uncomfortable being the only person of color or of my nationality in the room. Um, but just because, from my aspect, I was always seen as different anyway, just because I was always a taller dude at a younger age. So being my race, which would be African American in most people's eyes, it kind of brought about a lot of questions like, oh yeah, like, where's your dad? Where do you live? Do you play sports? Do you play basketball? Do you do this? Do you do that? And mostly were just stereotypical things that, some of the answers like were yes and no's, and it was like, okay, cool, I get it. I see why you would think that I'm a tall person, so you would think I play basketball.
I remember presenting to a group in northern New Mexico and being one of a handful of white faces in the crowd. And so I just pointed out the elephant in the room because I knew that the perception would be, why is this white woman here to talk about problems facing this group of people? And so I decided to use humor and to address it and say, you might have noticed that I don't look like you. And so what I did was state my qualifications to hopefully bridge the gap. I think that humor, if used appropriately, can soothe a lot of that.
I have so many children of color, African American and Hispanic, who cannot name to me anyone locally or in the state, much less nationally, that has succeeded, that has their identification, African American. Now, sports, but outside of sports, when I talk about historical Mexican American, Hispanic individuals, And of course, right now I'm blanking, but I know I've used several folks and several examples. The kids don't know who I'm talking about.
A lot of times people link race with microaggression, and they, in terms of the way scientists put things, they call it a mental health issue. When really, if that's what you're force feeding someone, if someone grows up in an environment where they're taught and all they see is different, of course, it's gonna play its role in mental health. You're gonna be thinking only one-sided.
Unfortunately, people who are a minority are built in with a whole bunch of different issues that are just generational. The not being able to open up to one another is generational. We pass that down from generation to generation. So that off the bat is an issue. Microaggression, I think has to do with a big part of your race. You know what I mean? People who have to live a more difficult life. I can understand why you're more aggressive and why you're more just like you have a dark cloud over you, or why you feel like the world is against you. I can see it because in some way, shape, or form, the world is against you.
When we think about who we are, and if anybody at any point tells somebody that they're less than in any slight or blatant way, it's going to affect who you believe you are, who you think you are, what you're capable of. And so I think it can very negatively affect mental health. But I think that there can be a positive force that can counteract that. And in any way, any time that there is that negativity, I hope and I pray that there is a positive force that can counteract that.
Being viewed as something different, being viewed as a negative thing, being viewed at all kind of puts a little chip on everybody's shoulder. Once you know that you're being watched and knowing that people were watching you because of a certain thing, because you have a certain viewpoint, because you're a certain skin tone, because you have a certain thought process, it kind of pushes you to a limit that you have to kind of watch yourself. You kind of have to watch the barriers of how far you go as far as pushing yourself mentally. Because, pushing yourself mentally is really good, but then after a while, it can cause you to push too far into stress. And once that hits, it's kind of a blurry situation because everything's free ball after that. Stress causes, depression, causes anger, causes, a lot of other symptoms that can come with it that will cause you to mentally break down.
We are living in a more violent time now than I think we have been in years past, in that people in power are calling open season on race, they're calling open season on women, they're calling open season on professions. There's a fellow in the news whose name escapes me, but I think that's okay because we shouldn't say his name, who is now calling out women that there shouldn't be any more female refs, there shouldn't be any, that there has to be a sacred, safe place for men to go where women can't go. They've even invaded the sports realm. That's fabulous for the mental health, not just of people my age, but of people growing up, because that is setting up a conversation that men need a safe place from, those pesky women who are trying to be interlopers on those male-dominated fields, and so on. We've got a woman in the news who's taking pot shots at nurses now because, they just play cards and they don't pay attention to patients, and they've got it easy. And I'm thinking, holy cow, in what realm is this, well, wise to begin with, but at what point do you stop in your own ignorance before you say something and say, maybe I don't know what this is about, and explore? And the more that these labels are thrown around, the more that people are attacked for their race, for their gender, for their choices, for their professions, the more unsettled and less safe that people feel. I think there is a direct correlation between that and the anxiety and the social distancing that people are experiencing right now. There's an increase, and I can't remember the percentage, in in suicide rates and attempts at suicide, not because people want to leave this planet, but because they are trying to stop the pain of existing in their own skin.